Welcome to Nurturing Relationships, our 6-week journey exploring Jewish wisdom for building deeper, richer connection in all of our relationships. This afternoon we are doing lesson 2, which is titled The Art of Listening. And in my opinion, this is the best lesson in this course. So I'm glad you're here. That's not to say that empathy wasn't important last week. That's not to say that forgiveness isn't very important, which is, happening the last week of this course, etc., etc. But I for some reason, I think that the way this lesson is structured is very, very enjoyable and very impactful. It's been very impactful for me, and hopefully it'll be the same for you. Very powerful. Okay, with that introduction, and one more introduction, let's get started. Today's class is sponsored, or I should say co-sponsored, by two individuals that are here, right here on the Zoom with us. They're very often here on the Zoom. In fact, they are the backbone of the Zoom. Mr. Ron Rohr and Mr. Phil Reitman. If not for them, the Zoom would have been gone long ago, the Zoom option, but they're holding it strong. So as long as you guys keep coming, we'll keep providing the Zoom option. So thank you to both of you and to Helene for joining. And thank you, of course, for sponsoring this afternoon's lesson. They tell a tale of a dedicated man who for 4 decades lived in Israel. He would make it a ritual to rise early every single morning to pray at the Western Wall, at the Kotel. And there was a journalist, a curious journalist, who wanted to interview him. So he said to him, what are you praying for? So he says to her, I am praying for peace in the Middle East. The journalist, because that's what journalists do, she asks a follow-up question. She says, how do you feel about your daily custom? And he says, sometimes I feel like I'm talking to a wall, right? Sometimes this sentiment is very familiar to every single one of us in our relationships. Hopefully not in our marriages, although sometimes they're there as well. Hopefully not with our loved ones. But all the time we have people that we talk to and we feel like their ears are working. They're hearing what we say, but they're not listening to what we say. There's a big difference between hearing and listening. Hearing takes place when sound waves cause a person's eardrums to vibrate, and as a result, they can hear a particular sound. Listening is a whole different thing altogether. Listening is when someone pays close attention to the words that we're saying. Psychologists often, in order to distinguish between just listening to sounds and actually comprehending what a person is saying, they'll often call it active listening. One way of distinguishing this is, does anybody ever use on the phone when you can talk to your phone and your phone types up what you're saying, like the voice dictation? Like you're texting someone and instead of typing it all out with the keyboard, you kind of, right? So when you do that, obviously the phone is hearing what you're saying, but it isn't necessarily listening. And I'll explain what I mean. You can say a word often that sounds the same. For example, the word right and right, R-I-G-H-T and W-R-I-T-E. And the phone will just choose one at random and put it down there. Maybe they're getting better at it more recently with AI, but certainly the phone is not listening to what you're saying. It's not understanding the thoughts that you're trying to say. And as a result, it's difficult for the phone to put down the right one. It hears what you're saying, but it's not listening with context. It doesn't appreciate what you're saying. And there's little doubt that we are all guilty of this to one degree or another. Hearing what someone else is saying and not always listening to what they're saying. And the opposite. Sometimes we're talking and we recognize that the person who's supposed to be listening is not really listening, they're just hearing. And that matters. Because last week we discussed the significance of cognitive and affective empathy, right? All the different types of empathy. And understanding another person's perspective, not just hearing it, but actually appreciating the perspective that they're coming from is crucial. Because it's almost impossible to do that without genuine listening. More generally, people just don't want to have relationships with people that are not listening to them. When we actually listen to each other, we feel valued, we feel heard, and we feel like the other person actually cares about what we're saying. And again, this applies on all levels of relationships. Last week we discussed the different circles of relationships. It doesn't make a difference what circle you're talking about. No matter what, everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to be able to to be able to have a proper listening partner in their relationship. Whether that's just a coworker who's trying to get across an idea to you, or who's trying to say something to you, or whether, okay. Now, improving our listening is definitely going to begin by assessing where we're holding in our listening. For this, we have an exercise. That's what we're going to open up with today. On page 52 in your book, there's an exercise that I think is very, very worth it, because I think a lot of people assume they are good listeners when this isn't the case. That's not to say we're terrible listeners, right? But we could use improvement in this regard. And if we start to take this exercise, you'll start to see what I mean. So the exercise basically goes like this. Describe when someone is talking to you. Do you almost never, sometimes, often, almost always, right? Depending, A, B, C, D. For each of these questions, what is your answer? Do you make people feel that you're interested in them and what they have to say? Do you think about what you want to say while others are talking? So take a few minutes. Let's fill out this exercise. Give yourself a score of A, B, C, D for each one. And then you can score yourself based on the following numbers on page 55, right? So you start on page 52, start going through them. When you get to page 55, you'll see the scoring legend. And then you can put down your score. And when you total the number of points, you will see whether you are an excellent listener, or whether you are a poor listener, or whether you're somewhere in between. There's a good chance that most of us fall somewhere on the spectrum in between. Either average listeners, slightly above average, slightly below average, whatever it is. Listen, if somebody scores excellent on this exercise, by all means, interrupt me right now. You will give the entire class. I'm happy to listen to you. I'm happy to do all the listening. But if you didn't get excellent on this exercise, which I suspect most of us didn't or won't, don't share the results with us. We're not that interested in knowing where you're holding. What we would like to do is try and spend some time today, 90 minutes to be precise, 85 at this point, where we are going to grow in our listening skills. All right, and that's going to start by appreciating why we need to listen. So let me go through today's lesson and explain what's going to happen today. Like last week, today's lesson will be divided into 3 sections, technically 4 sections, but let's call it 3. In the first section, I want to talk about why listening is crucial for relationships. This might be obvious to some of you, but I think the more we explore it and we appreciate why listening is such an important facet of a relationship, the more you'll be encouraged to actually work on it. Section 2 is going to continue that conversation, but it's going to continue it from the perspective of Hasidism. Why does Hasidism motivate us to be better listening? Okay, but again, why? Why listen? Why listen? Why listen? Okay. Then, after we figure out why we need to listen, which will take us about, I would say, 40 minutes, we are then going to get into how. How to engage in authentic listening. Primarily, we will be going to Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, and there's some very, very powerful insights. If you learn some of the Mishnahs there together with commentary, that will really help us come up with, bullet points of how to be better listeners. And finally, we will try to conclude with concrete tips and behaviors to become better listeners. All right? So very similar to last week, we're going to understand why to listen. We're going to do 4 reasons in total. 3 and then 1 from Hasidism. Then we're going to see how we can go about changing that, and then we'll do some concrete tips, little digestible, bite-sized tips of how to become better listeners. Are we ready for the journey? Let's dive into it. We mentioned that listening is crucial for relationships because it enables empathy and it makes us more likable. But as we will see, the importance of listening extends well beyond this. Today, we are going to make 4 points in total. In this first section, we are going to make 3 points. We're going to make 3 points as to why to listen. And we're going to call them, number 1, listen to provide. Number 2, listen to know. And number 3, listen to connect. I should mention that while this lesson is just like a little disclaimer, that even though this lesson is talking about listening, we're assuming that this listening that we're engaging in is between 2 regular friends, regular coworkers, regular spouses, etc. When there's disagreement, then there are specific ways and stresses that you need to bear in mind when listening, and that's obviously the title of lesson 3, which is titled The Art of Disagreeing, next week. But for now, let's just focus on 2 people that are trying to be good listeners to each other. Okay? So we'll start with the first one. The first one is listen to connect. For this, we are going to go to the Haggadah. And here's how we're going to do this, okay? We are going to go through the four sons in the Haggadah, all right? But here's how we're going to do this. Text one, let's start with text one, okay? I'm jumping a little bit. I know I skipped the figure on page 57, but for now, let's go to the bottom of page 57 to text one. Ron, can you read it for us, please?
The Torah discusses four children. One is wise, one is wayward, one is simple, and one does not know how to ask.
So you may have heard of these four sons, the four prototypes of children, four different types of children. One is wise, one is wayward, one is simple, and one does not know how to ask. In Hebrew, echad chacham, echad rasha, echad tam, ve'echad she'eno yodeh lishol. Okay, beautiful. Why do these four sons come? Who came up with this idea of the fact that the Torah is speaking to four different types of children? The answer is it comes from a combination of reading figure 2.1 on page 57 and doing exercise 2.2 on page 58. Okay, let me explain. On page 57, and Ron, I'm going to ask you to read this for us as well, there are four different quotes from four different places. Three of them from Exodus, one of them from Deuteronomy, and Ron is going to read them for us in a moment. Four different quotes. Each of these quotes essentially says, let's tell our children, it's important to tell our children about the story of the Exodus. And on the surface, the verses sound like they're saying exactly the same thing. But obviously when it comes to the Torah, there's no such thing as just repetitive redundancy, right? So it must be that the Torah is giving us more here. So what the rabbis did is they examined the specific nuanced differences between the way the language is in each of these four verses. And then they came up with this idea that, oh, clearly the Torah is talking to four different types of children. All of it is the importance of telling over the story of the Exodus to your children, but it's four different types of children, therefore you have to talk to them each in a different way. So Ron is going to read for us. Here's what we're going to do. Ron is going to read for us the four verses, one at a time. The first one from Exodus, 12, 26 to 27. Then the next one, then the next one. Number 1, 2, 3, 4. And as he's reading them, I'd like you to try to do the exercise on page 58. In other words, examine the language that he's reading, maybe contrast them, right, against each other, and try and appreciate which one is which child. All right? Ron, when you're ready, you can start reading the verses for us, please. They're on page 57.
57.
Figure 2.1, the children's questions.
When your children say to you, "What is this service to you?" you shall say.
That is the first time the Torah tells us to tell over the story of the Exodus to our children. When your children say to you, "What is this service to you?" you shall say. I would like everybody to try your best to circle for that one. That's the first one. It's Exodus 12, 26, 27. Try and circle, is that the wise, the wayward, the simple, or the doesn't ask son? Ron, let's do the second verse. This one is from Exodus 13:8.
You should tell your child on that day, saying.
Again, another time the Torah is telling us to tell over the story of the Exodus to our children. Who is this talking about? Circle the one you feel is correct. And now, Ron, Exodus 13:14.
In the future, when your child asks you, "What is this?" you shall say.
Okay, so this is another child. And finally, the Deuteronomy quote.
In the future, when your child asks you, "What are these testimonies, statutes, and ordinances that our God has commanded you?" you shall say.
All right, so circle which one you think this is. And now let's unpack it. If you think you have the answers, please do me a favor and chime in here. Let's start with a simple one. Exodus 13:8 is obviously which one of the four children? Anybody? The second one. Exodus 13:8, which child is that? Anybody want to jump in here? Yeah, go ahead, Phil. Just unmute yourself. There you go.
Doesn't ask.
The one who doesn't ask. Very good. That is the only verse in which it's not instigated by a child asking. In all three of the other verses, it says when your child says to you, in the future when your child asks you, in the future when your child asks you, right? Okay, beautiful. So we have one of them parsed out. Number 2 is the doesn't ask child. Anybody want to guess which one is the wise child?
Deuteronomy.
Very good. Why is Deuteronomy the wise child, Phil? Any ideas?
Well, it's a complex question asking about statutes and ordinances and God's commandments. It's got a lot of elements to the
He's getting into
question.
details between mitzvahs. Oh, there's some mitzvahs that are statutes, some mitzvahs that are testimonies, some mitzvahs that are ordinances. He's clearly very wise. And by the way, another detail is he includes himself. He says, "Our God." Like, I also believe in God. I'm wise. I got this. Right? I'm here with you. Okay. Mark, you want to try to chime in here? Which one do you think is the wayward son? You're muted, Mark. We have to.
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay.
I don't
Anybody?
know.
Ron, you want to try to chime in? Which one is the wayward son?
The first one, Exodus.
Very good. Why?
So when your children say to you, "What is this service to you?" You're specifically asking, "What do you want us to do?"
It's not just that he's asking what he wants to do, he's also excluding himself. He's like, what is this service to you? What does it mean to you? I got nothing to do with this nonsense that you guys are busy dipping vegetables into salt water and eating matzah or whatever. I got nothing to do with this. You're doing this craziness, right? So he's clearly a little bit wayward. And finally, the simple son speaks with extreme brevity. What is this? That's a very simple way of asking a question, right? What is this? Somebody asks, "What is this?" You have to talk to him the way he answers, the way he asks. Well, I think that once we know about this diversity, it becomes very, very clear that you don't talk to each of these children the same, right? Every single one of these children needs to be spoken to in a different way. If a child asks, "What are these testimonies, statutes, and ordinances?" then you need to answer him a nuanced answer that goes through all details. And by the way, it makes our Haggadah experience, our Seder experience longer. Why? Because we're trying to talk to each child the way that they ask. But I think that this really will drive home for us the importance of listening in relationships. You see, here obviously it's the parent-child relationship, but here what the Torah is telling us, don't just hear what your children are saying. If you just hear what your children are saying, you'll answer them all the same. They all want to know what's going on. I'll explain to them what's going on and move on. I explain in one way and move on. But if you actually hear the differences in the way that they're asking the questions, the nuances and the tones and the inflections in their voices, right, and their choice of words, so then immediately you start saying, "Hold on, I got to talk to these children differently. These are different children who interact differently, and therefore, if I want to get through to them, if I actually want, then I'm going to listen to them properly, and that will enable me to answer them properly." There's a story that they say about Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik. Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik was the Rav of Brisk, and once right before Passover, right? So before Passover is famously one of the most busy times for a rabbi. Everybody's kosherizing their homes, everybody's buying their matzah and getting their wine and making sure everything's in order, and they got to make sure they know what they're doing for the Seder, etc., etc., etc. Cleaning their homes, right? Biur chametz, all the different things going on. And there's a knock at his door, and someone comes to the door and he has a question with the rabbi. He's led into the rabbi's study, and he asks the rabbi, "Rabbi, are you allowed to have 4 cups of milk for the Seder? Instead of having wine, can you have 4 cups of milk?" So the rabbi did not answer his question. Instead, the rabbi opened up his drawer. He took out 25 ruble, and he gave it to him, and he sent him on his way. He said, now you can buy everything you need for Yom Tif, and you should go on your way. The man left. And Rabbi Soloveitchik's wife turned to him and she said to him, "Hold on a second. I get it. You heard that he was asking if he can use 4 glasses of milk for the Seder, so you figure he doesn't have 4 cups of wine. So you figure, let me give him money, right? But why did you have to give him 25 ruble? 1 ruble would have sufficed in order to get wine, 4 cups of wine for the Seder. Why 25 ruble? God knows that it could have been used to help other people." So the rabbi turned to her and he said, "You realize that his specific question was, he was asking, can you use 4 cups of milk? In other words, he's not planning to have meat at this Seder. A Jew is not allowed to eat meat and milk in the same meal. What type of Seder would it be without meat? What type of Seder? He can't afford anything with the Seder. It's not just the wine that's his issue. So if I gave him 25 rubles, that he should be able to afford everything." This is a prime example of listening to provide, right? Both what we're doing with the 4 sons at the Seder and what this Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik did is they're not just hearing the words that they're saying, they're listening with the intention to provide. They're listening between the lines what's going on here so that they can provide whatever is needed for the other, right? In the case of the children, it's just to be able to provide the right answer in the right way that this child needs to hear. And in the case of this poor man, it was Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik realized that how much money he needs just by listening properly to the way he was asking the question. I'll give you an example. This is not true only of relationships, between a rabbi and his progeny. or between parents and children. This is true of all relationships. I'll give you an example. Let's just take two friends, right? Sam arrives late to an important meeting, all right? And his friend says to him, Sam, you're always late, right? His friend is obviously irritated. His friend is obviously frustrated. It's not just that there's an issue that he's late right now. It's not even the fact that he's always late. He's expressing a certain frustration. The worst thing Sam can do is only hear the words that his friend is saying and not the emotion behind it. And therefore, I start to get into that. Me, always late? Tell me when was the last time I was late? Right? This has nothing to do with those details of whether you are or aren't always late. Appreciate. And granted, it would be very difficult because the fact that his friend is telling him you're always late, etc., is obviously a difficult thing to not react to defensively. But if we're actually listening, then we hear the frustration in the friend's voice and we say, oh, I hear you, you're frustrated, I'm sorry that I was late. As opposed to saying, oh, I'm actually not always late. Let's get into a conversation about whether I'm always late or not. That's only going to make us later, right? It's going to make me even more frustrated at you. You don't understand how much you caused me that I was standing here and waiting for you for an hour or whatever it is, right? In other words, like the Haggadah and like Rabbi Soloveitchik, Sam should be listening not just to the words that he's saying, but actually listening to how he could provide what the other person is missing. In this case, the person is missing an apology or whatever it is, right? An appreciation on Sam's fact that he appreciates that he made him wait and that the other person is frustrated, etc. And this is our first motivating factor to listen. The only way to provide for those around us, for our spouses, for our children, for our parents, for our coworkers, for our friends, for the person by the counter at the grocery store, is if when we're listening to them, and again, each one applied in the proper way. We don't listen and provide in the same way for a grocery store clerk as we would for our spouse. But we often assume it's sufficient to hear just the words that they're saying casually, and we don't expend any extra effort to actually understand where they're coming from. Now, this ties directly into empathy, like we spoke about last week, but it's a unique skill which is called listening, and specifically, it's reason number one why we want to listen in relationships, so that we can provide properly. Okay, so where were we here? Let's go back to the thing. This is called listening to provide. The second reason why it's important to listen is in order to, is in order to know. Listen to know. What do I mean? There is this interesting commentary from Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the Rebbe Rayatz, the previous Chabad Rebbe, our Rebbe's father-in-law, on the Haggadah. So he's talking about these four sons, and he points out something very interesting. Elise, can you read for us, please? Text 2.
Okay, thank you. 2A, right?
2, page 59.
Okay. Okay, this is the deepest interpretation
No.
of the statement. This is
The four types of children.
2. Okay, there's a
Text.
lot of 2s. Okay.
On page 59. You might be in the wrong lesson, I think.
Oh, 59.
Are you on page 59?
Yeah. Speech mirrors character.
Yes.
The four types of children inquire according to their respective natures. This is the deeper interpretation of the statement. The one who is wise, what is he saying? If you want to know what is he, analyze his saying. The same applies to all four types of children.
The previous Rebbe points out a nuance or a different reading in the way you could read the Hebrew. The Hebrew says, Mahu Omer. Okay? Again, it says, let's say it's talking about the Chacham, the wise son. It says, Chacham Mahu Omer, which literally translates means the wise one, what does he say? And then we go on to say what to quote the verse that the wise one says and how we answer him, etc. Beautiful. The previous Rebbe says, what's if we put the question mark a little earlier? Instead of putting the question mark after Omer, Mahu Omer, what does he say? Put the question mark after Mahu. In Hebrew, Mahu means, who is he? Chacham Mahu. If you want to know who, you want to get to know the wise son, you want to know who he is, Omer. Pay attention to what he says. If you pay attention to the words that a person uses, then you can actually get to know who they are. You can actually get to know their character. When parents listen, they actually learn about their child's unique personality and nature, right? So for example, you have a child comes home from school. Child is complaining about something that happened during recess. I was trying to play and David took my toy and whatever it is, right? One thing to do is obviously to listen to provide. The child needs somebody to listen to him. The child maybe wants you to call their teacher to get involved, depending how extreme the situation is. You're listening to provide. Another thing you can do is, besides for providing, you can also listen to who the child is, to get to know the child. When you hear that, you'll realize that the child is a child who cares about this, who cares about that. Regardless of providing, even if you don't provide, or even if you do provide, regardless. Irrespective of that. Knowing the child is a big part of having a relationship with them. And one of the biggest obstacles often to listening is the lack of interest in a speaker's subject matter, or the feeling that we already know what they have to say. If you're not listening to know them, then it's all about the information that they're giving you, which could even be good because it can help you provide for them. But if it's all about the information they're giving you, so let's say you know the information already, so then you don't listen, right? Listening should not be dependent only on providing. A deeper way of listening is listening also in order to know the other person. I'll give you a story that really captures this value. There is a very famous chassid whose name was Rabbi Mendel Futerfas. Rabbi Mendel Futerfas passed away in 1995. I'm sure many of you are familiar with many stories of his. I have personally shared many of his stories here on this Zoom and on during these classes. But this particular story comes from all the way at the end of his life. So in 1994, Rabbi Mendel Futerfas moved to London. He had family in London, and he lived there for the last year of his life until he passed away in 1995. For a large portion of that time, he was bedridden at home. And so many of the Hasidim from the local London community would come over and they would visit and they would talk to him. One of the most common times to do so was on Shabbat afternoon. So sure enough, one Shabbat afternoon comes. It's after davening, and a community member, a man by the name of Ephraim Potash, comes over to the Mendel Futerfas, comes home, he comes to his home, and he comes to visit him and said he spent some time with him. And as he's telling him, he's recounting excited everything that happened in Shul, the davening and the Farbrengen, the story that happened afterwards. So the Mendel was very intrigued, and he's listening attentively. And Mr. Potash begins to share with him. He says, "You'll never believe it. There was this amazing story that was shared at the Kiddush." And he goes through the story that was shared. Beautiful. After the conversation finishes, Mr. Potash leaves, he departs, and that's the end of that. Beautiful. Shortly after that, another community member, father of a friend of mine, Dr. Naftali Lowenthal, also comes to visit Mendel Futerfas. Sure enough, he's telling him what happened in Shul, and he starts to tell over the exact same story with this excitement and he's involved in that. He starts over the whole story. The Mendel listens to the whole thing. And after Dr. Lowenthal left, they had a few minutes, and sure enough, another visitor comes in. This time it was Rabbi Shmuel Lu. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He was very, very good friends with my father-in-law's father, Jack or Yaakov Hanoka, and he was there in 770 and was very instrumental in helping him learn when he was just becoming religious. In any event, Rabbi Shmuel Lu comes in to visit Rabbi Mendel Futerfas, and he tells him, "You'll never believe what happened today at the Kiddush," and he starts telling this amazing, extraordinary story. And Rabbi Mendel is sitting and he's listening just as attentively, and he's listening carefully, right? He's listening the whole time quietly. He doesn't bother telling them that he knows the story. After Rabbi Shmuel Lu recounted the story and he left, one of the attendants walked over to Rabbi Mendel and he said to him, "Why did you listen to the same story 3 times?" Rabbi Mendel looked at him and he responded with profound insight. He said, "I did not hear the same story 3 times. I heard 3 stories." Now, if Rabbi Mendel was only listening to provide, if he was only listening to gain information, right? If he was listening, in other words, to put it in the language of last week's class, the foundation of this whole course, if he was listening only with his animal soul, what can I get out of this? Then he already got the story out of the first one. Why did he love a second time? And even if you say, okay, maybe the second one will provide some details that the first one forgot, the third one he certainly doesn't need to have, right? But that's not his answer. He doesn't say, I was listening to it because I want to get all the details right. His answer is, when 3 different people tell you a story, each one of them is telling you a different story. And the story they're telling you is not even the words they're using. The story they're telling you is who they are, and what they care about, and what motivates them, what excites them. So he was listening to the story of the life of Mr. Ephraim Potash. And he was listening to the story of the life of Rabbi Shmuel Lu and the story of the life of Dr. Naftali Lowenthal. Each of these people came with their personality. He was listening to get to know them. That's what we would call listening to know. There's a text. I don't know if any of you want to turn to it, but if you want to turn to it, you could. It's in the appendix. It's on page 91. It's text 17. Okay? If you want, you can go there. I'm going to read it. Okay? This is from the Orchot Tzadikim, and he has a wonderful insight about listening. He says, if someone tells you something you already know, stay quiet, stay silent until the speaker has finished. Why? For you may discover a new detail of which you were not previously aware. All right. So far, still listening in order to get information, right? But look at these last two lines. Even if you anticipate no fresh information, what happens? Remaining silent allows the speaker the pleasure of relating something to you. Listening to the other person means allowing the other person to talk. Means allowing the other person to express their personality and have the pleasure of telling you what they want to tell you. And finally, so up until now, what we've been talking, we're back on page 59, figure 2.3. So you can see we've now learned our second reason to listen. The second very important reason why we should listen. Number one is listen to provide, to be able to provide properly for the speaker. And number two, and that doesn't necessarily mean physical provisions. That can also mean emotional provisions or whatever it is. And second of all, we listen to get to know the other person, to be able to have this relationship that we have with them. The third reason that we will get to appreciate today for why we should listen is not just to provide and to know, but to listen to connect. What does it mean to listen to connect? To listen to connect means the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So, sure, you listen to others to provide. Sure, you listen to others to know. But the whole reason that we talk to each other, even if there is something we're trying to learn from each other, the main reason we do this is in order to get to know each other. The depth of getting to know another human being. Remember how last week we discussed that the human connection is essential. It's not good for man to be alone. A big part of not being alone is talking to other people. Regardless of whether you need to talk to them, you don't need, finding a common ground in which I can talk and the other person can actually listen, and there's a strong connection that's formed through those words. Let's see how this is stressed in this verse from Song of Songs. Mark, you want to read for us, please? You have your book? Oh, he doesn't have his book.
No, I don't have it. I'll get it tonight.
Okay, sounds good. I'll see you tonight then.
I don't have
Ron, if I can ask you to read for us, please. Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 14, a desire of love, text 3.
Show me your appearance. Let me listen to your voice. For your voice is pleasant and your appearance is comely.
The male protagonist in this, right? I think we're all familiar with this, but just in case, Song of Songs is a beautiful love story that is written as an analog for the relationship of God and the between God and the Jewish people, in which God is the male and the Jewish people are the female. And in this verse, the male protagonist, in other words, God, says to the Jewish people, he says first of all, show me your appearance. But then he says, make me be able to listen to your voice. I just want to hear you. I want to be able to have a conversation. I want to be able to connect to you through your voice. The sages point out that this is a reference to our matriarchs. And I know this is going to bring up a big question, because it's going to ask if God is just being cruel and selfish. But hopefully we can leave that question for another time. Our sages explain that this is why the matriarchs were barren. The matriarchs were barren for a long time because Hashem enjoyed, He loved when they would pray to Him. And there's nothing like being left with no other choice that brings out the depths of prayer. We're told the same thing, by the way, about Adam, that when Adam was created, the world didn't right away trees and fruits, etc. They didn't grow right away. They were ready to come out. Hashem created them on one of the days of creation, but they didn't fully grow until Adam realized that the world was missing rain, and then he prayed for rain, and Hashem made it rain. The commentary asks why, and the answer, because Hashem wanted to hear Adam's voice. He wanted to hear Adam ask for rain. Why? Sometimes the needs that we have are not even needs in order to get those needs. It's not about getting those needs met. Sometimes the true need that we have is connection. And all the other needs are a means to an end in order to get that connection. Let me explain. Children will often come over to you, right? And they're telling you something they learned in school, or they're asking you a question. And I've tried this with my children. I've often tried this. Well, not often, but sometimes I've tried this, where it's a question that I know they have the answer to. So I figure, let me ignore them. Let's see what happens if I just don't answer their question. Now the answer is very, very clear, plain as day. They came over to me. They were asking me for rice cakes. The rice cakes are here on the table. When they started talking to me, they would ask me where the rice cakes were, and I just ignored them. Then they turned around. They see the rice cakes on the table, so they have now the answer to their question. Why do they keep asking me this question? Often, what they're really asking is, Father, pay attention to me. Connect with me. I'm asking you a question, a benign question, or I'm telling you a fact, a benign fact that has to do with something at school or whatever, God knows what. But the real reason I'm asking this question, the real reason I'm talking to you is in order to open up a path, an opportunity for you to connect with me. When you listen to my question, and then you answer my question, the question and the answer are only secondary to the main thing. Like Stephen Covey puts it, the main thing is to always make the main thing the main thing. Don't forget that the main purpose of all the needs that we have in our relationships, and even the needs that are met through the relationship, is just in order to have the connection, just in order to actually have that connection. And this is the third reason that I would say it's so important to listen in relationships. So number one was listen to provide. Number two was listen to know. And number three, finally, is listen to connect. Okay. But having explored these three interpersonal values that inspire us to listen, it becomes evident that the animalistic soul that we discussed in the previous lesson is completely incapable of listening. Why? Because the animal soul, last week we already explained, its middle name is selfish. It's all about me. What can I get? Right? Listening to someone else is all about the other. You're listening in order to provide for the other person. So therefore, the animal soul is not motivated to listen. The animal soul doesn't want to listen, has no interest in listening. Think about it. Even if the animal soul has to listen, for example, in order to get what it wants. So let's say, for example, you have someone that you're trying to forge a relationship with. And the only reason you're forging a relationship with them is not because you want to have a relationship with them, not because you care, etc. It's only in order to get something out of them. Classic animal soul manipulation, right? What we called last week fish love. So then the listening will never be true listening. You'll just suffice if the listening is only motivated by an animalistic desire to have more, to get something out of the other person. Then what will happen? Automatically, you will only be listening enough to be able to get what you want out of the other person. You won't actually be able to listen to them and connect with them and provide for them and get to know them, etc. In order to do that kind of listening, you need to tap into your godly soul. Last week we spoke about being yourself, not just being yourself, but being your true self, right? Being your best self, being who you really are at your godly essence. Why? Because the animal soul, at its very nature, just wants to speak. It wants to give. It wants to not give to others. It wants to expand. That's what I'm looking for. It wants to speak and expand and spread its ego out more and more. The godly soul is the opposite. It has no need to expand itself and to give out to others. All it wants is to listen. All it wants is, okay, let me put myself on the side. Let me let everybody else give. Let me let everybody else expand, and I will just accept them. Right? That's the difference between the animal soul way of life and the godly soul way of life. That's why I think even more than listening to provide, to know, not even more. In order to listen to provide, to listen to know, and to listen to connect, we need to be in tune with our godly soul. Okay. But let's take this one step deeper. Excuse me. We spoke about the importance of listening in order to achieve three things in a relationship. But there's another reason why soul consciousness, why being in tune with your godly soul is actually going to help you become a good listener. And we'll understand this reason by unpacking a story that just requires a brief introduction. That introduction is, I'm taking you back now to the late 1600s, early 1700s, times of the Baal Shem Tov, followed by the Maggid of Mezrich and the Alter Rebbe. So Hasidism, the Hasidic movement is just taking off, and one of the major things that they introduce is the importance of the power of prayer. Then we get this story. You'll recognize this story because in the last course, for those of you that attended it, the course on happiness, we brought this exact same story and we played the exact same video. But this time I want to bring out a different point from this same story. All right? So pay attention. So first turn your attention to the video screens, and then we will unpack this story.
Rabbi Hillel of Parich was a master teacher of Hasidus and Jewish mysticism. When Reb Hillel traveled, his student Reb Sholem Homener would accompany him. One evening, they stopped at an inn and Reb Sholem began to pray the evening service. As part of the prayers, Hasidim often meditate deeply on the nature of God as well as undertake profound soul-searching. Reb Sholem spent so long meditating and praying that by the time he completed, the sun had risen. So, Reb Sholem began the morning service. Later that day, the innkeeper came to pray the afternoon prayers and saw that Reb Sholem was still in the middle of the morning service. The innkeeper, who was a simple villager, exclaimed, "What is it with this Jew? Yesterday he spent the whole night in prayer, and now he has prayed the whole day. I'm different. I can just say Shema Yisrael and be done with it." Obviously, this man is a simpleton. Reb Sholem had completed his prayers and overheard this remark. His mentor, Reb Hillel, later commented, "The words of the simple villager had more impact on Reb Sholem in terms of self-improvement than 3 years of me teaching him the deepest secrets of Jewish mysticism."
I want to take a moment. If you don't remember all the details of the story, it's okay. It's text 4, all right? The story of the immersive prayer. And I want to take a moment to analyze this story, okay? So, obviously, the villager was ignorant. He was unaware of what was going on over here. He had no idea that Reb Sholem was praying for hours and hours because he was meditating and connecting to God on a level that probably superseded any level of this simple, ignorant villager. Okay, but that's not the way Reb Sholem took his answer. Even though he said this comment to Reb Sholem did not choose to go into defense mode. Right? So remember Sam, who says, whose friend says to him, "Sam, you're always late." Right? It's true that Sam's friend said this in a very negative way, and there's better ways for him to express his frustration with Sam. And perhaps he doesn't even need to express the frustration. Maybe he can just be a little bit more understanding of Sam and judge him favorably. But still, there's a better way for Sam to listen to him. Similarly, here the same thing is happening. Just because we're saying that there's a better way, and we're soon going to unpack exactly what that way was, for Reb Sholem to listen, just because we're saying there's a better way for him to listen, this doesn't absolve the villager. The villager did indeed rush to judgment, and he shouldn't have. However, Reb Sholem chooses to listen to this person's words. Now, question: is he listening to this person's words in order to provide, to know, or to connect? It would seem that if he did so, that's not the theme of this story. The theme of this story is a fourth and a more important way, perhaps the deepest way of all, that he's choosing to listen to the words that the villager says to him. And this brings us to the underlying beliefs that prompted Shalom to be impacted by the words he heard. You see, Shalom is listening to this man, and yet he's not listening to the words as if he's saying them. He's listening to them as if God says them. This is predicated on two parts of the same belief system. What in Hebrew we usually call hashgacha pratit. In Hasidic philosophy, this is known as divine providence, that everything that happens comes from God. But allow me to break it down for you. Number one is, Reb Sholem obviously walked around his life with a belief system, with an attitude of, not what do I need, but what am I needed for? Let me explain. No matter what happened to him in his life, it seems that he was always looking for how can I contribute in a positive way to this moment in time. What exactly is needed from me in this moment? Which is a completely godly soul attitude. Think about it. An animal soul walks around everywhere. What can I get? What can I get out of this moment? What can I get out of this situation? But if Shalom walked around with a firm belief that if something is happening, that means there's a moment that is important for me to grab with both hands and make it into the most holy and spiritual and amazing uplifted moment that I could. But there's a deeper point here. There's a deeper point here. And it's a point that is really discussed in text 5 from the Rebbe. Let's see it. Let's read it on page 65. Phil, can I ask you to read for us, please? Personal divine providence.
The Talmud teaches that of all that God created in his world, not a single thing was created without purpose. This principle extends to all events and occurrences, none of which is purposeless, for all that transpires is directed by personal divine providence. Similarly, awareness of specific information is not purposeless. We are not made aware of anything irrelevant to our service of God.
And Shalom Humaner exemplified this mindset. Let me explain what I mean. It's not just that he walked around, instead of asking, what will this moment give me? Instead, he would ask, what can I give to this moment, right? There's another idea here. And that is that nothing is random. Everything is meaningful, including things that we see and things that we hear. Let me explain what I mean. Have you ever been walking or driving down a particular road that you've driven thousands of times before, and all of a sudden you notice something, and you think to yourself, I can't believe I never noticed that, right? Part of the answer, the Hasidic answer, the Hasidic philosophical answer, as to why you noticed it today and you didn't notice it any other day, is because today you were supposed to notice it. Hashem is talking to you through the scenarios that happen to you, that happen around you in your life. So far I've given you an example of vision. Let me give you an example of a hearing. We all know the difference between being in a room with one other person, right? And even if that you're not in the room with that other person in order to listen to them, you both happen to be in the room. Let's say the shul here at Chabad, right? You're in the front, somebody else in the back, and you're talking on the phone, whatever it is. Very often you will be able to hear every single word that the other person is saying. Why? Because you're the only two people in the room. What happens when there's 50 people in the room and they're all talking? So now you're at a Chabad event and there's a socializing hour. What happens is our minds do something interesting, which is we tune out 98% of the noise and we're able to isolate what it is that we want to hear. For example, if you're in conversation with someone, there's this massive cocktail hour going on, 50 people are talking in the room, and there's one person right across from you. Every once in a while, you might need to bend in and listen to what they're saying more carefully, but chances are you can tune everything else out and listen to that person. Why is it that when there was only one person talking, you couldn't tune him out? But when there's 50 people talking, you can tune them all out and listen only to the person ahead of you. Why is that? That's because as human beings, we have the ability to not only do we have the ability, it's an important ability, and it's a crucial ability to be able to tune out 99% of what we could be interacting with at any given moment. And this is what we call focus. But it's not always done actively. Think about driving, for example, right? When you drive down a freeway or down a road, right? There are often 1.5 million things that can be taking your attention. I'll give you an example of when I'm driving and I often have kids in the back. They are often pointing out to me things that are on the right and on the left that I totally don't notice. It's not just that I don't notice them. My mind goes into a certain space where I'm actually tuning out 99% of what's happening, and I'm only taking in the pieces. It's a very sophisticated part of the human brain. I'm only taking in the pieces of data that there are in front of me that are important to my driving. I'm driving, and I know that I need to be safe, so I know exactly where all the cars are. It's interesting. Sometimes my kids are not paying attention to the car in front of us or the car behind us. They're not paying attention to the car that's thinking of merging into my lane. But they will tell me that there's a store on my right that says Sherwin-Williams paint, or whatever it is. This just happened the other day. My son is learning how to read, and he was telling me what it says on the side, and I didn't even notice we were passing by a Sherwin-Williams. Why? Because I totally tuned it out. Am I not capable of seeing the Sherwin-Williams? Of course I can. But I didn't see it, and he saw it. Now, in this instance, I'm actively choosing to do that. But it turns out Hashem is doing this to us at every single moment in our lives. He's tuning out 99% of the things that we could see or hear or listen to, right? And he's saying, I'm going to make sure you notice certain things in your life. And with the certain things in your life that you notice, that's Hashem sending a message to you. And this is what we mean when we say Ashgacha Pratis. Now, Reb Shalom Huminer had both of these things, right? The man in this story had both of these things as a core belief part, as a core part of his belief system. First of all, that every single moment in life, there's something there for me to appreciate, and that nothing in life that happens to me is random. Even something that I hear. The fact that I heard this and I didn't hear something else means that what I heard is supposed to have a message for me. So he hears a simple villager, and granted, that simple villager is saying something that's completely off the mark, but to him, the immediate thing that he thinks to himself is, number one, this is God talking to me, right? There's relevance here. It's a comment that was earmarked for me to listen to, number one. Number two, there must be something that I have to do as a result. And that's when he comes to the conclusion, indeed, I have to work on my prayer, etc., interpreting the comment as if it came directly from God. Once we adopt this thinking, that we appreciate that every single thing we hear in our lives, right? So that means you're standing by the Kiddush, and you're standing in the line for the buffet, and the person in front of you actually is somebody that you think is a big waste of time, and they're talking to you about a topic that you think is the biggest waste of time. If we adopted Abshalom Hominer mindset, then all of a sudden, no person is a waste of time. No word that they say is a waste of time, because obviously, if they're in my life right now and I'm listening to them, there's a reason, there's a message that I'm supposed to be listening to, right? And this is what we will call listening to a line, right? Listening to a line is the fourth. We're on page 66 now. Is the fourth and deepest way to listen. So, on a very simple level, any person that's talking to us, we shouldn't just hear them, but we should listen to them. And at the very basic level, that means listening to provide. What do they need from me? Right? This person needs wine. This person needs meat. This person, whatever it is, right? This person needs to be heard. This person needs for somebody to console them. This person needs empathy. Whatever it is that the person needs, we listen in order to provide. Don't just hear, listen, and listen in order to provide. On a deeper level, listen to get to know the person. In addition to being able to provide for them, you can get to know what type of person they are in this relationship. On an even deeper level, listen to connect. The whole purpose of this whole thing is to connect. So irrespective of whether you're going to fill their needs or not fill their needs, irrespective of whether you're going to get to know them or not, you're connecting with them by listening to them. And then finally, the deepest point of all is to listen to a line. To align with the purpose for which you are here in this world. Hashem has a purpose for which you were listening to this particular thing, right? And there's a message that he's sending you. Listen to align yourself with God's purpose. And this purpose type of mindset is obviously a characteristic that is unique to the godly soul, because that's what the godly soul is trying to do at every moment in its life. Okay. We have 33 minutes left. And in the 33 minutes that remain, what I'd like to try to do is, excuse me, let me just bring back up the slides. Right, this was listen to a line. Okay. In the 33 minutes that remain, what I'd like to try to do is two things. Number one, let's talk about how to engage in authentic listening, and then let's conclude with some practical tips as to how to do so. Okay? What is the how to engaging in authentic listening? What is the core of being able to listen to someone else properly? So in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of Our Fathers, there's this very interesting Mishnah that we are going to unpack. Elise, I'm going to ask you to read for us the Mishnah. It's text 6 on page 67, and then we'll unpack it. You're muted. I'm sorry, you're muted. It's got to happen once in every class, so this time it happened. Go ahead.
Okay. Elisha, the son of Avuya, would say, learning Torah as a child is comparable to ink inscribed on fresh paper. Learning Torah as an older person is comparable to ink inscribed on erased paper.
So Elisha ben Avuya, who by the way is an interesting character, and there's a whole discussion about why his name is even mentioned here, because he was a rabbi who went off the path, a whole different discussion. But Elisha ben Avuya teaches us something very interesting. He says the mind of a child is comparable to a clean paper, right? One on the left, clean, brand new paper, somebody's writing on it. The mind of an older person, when you teach Torah to them, it's as if you're writing down on a paper that has been written on and erased and written and erased and written and erased. So there's so much going on underneath that it's hard to even make out what is going on. Okay. The problem is that this Mishnah is read by all Jews. It's not just read by children. It's not just read by those seeking to study Torah, right? Even mature adults, so meaning the lesson to a child, I understand. Learn Torah now, you're young, you're fresh, learn Torah. That's a great lesson. But when you're talking to an adult, why would you tell them? What are you trying to tell them? It's a lost cause? Right? That can't be the case. That's not what the Mishnah is trying to say. It has to be that there's some sort of growth for every single type of Jew. And the attitude that the Mishnah is suggesting is the attitude that I would argue is the fundamental behind all listening, all proper listening. What is that? Listen with a clean slate. A child's mind is receptive. An adult's mind is judgmental. Let's think about that for a second. What's the difference between the way a child listens to something that is being told them, and the way an adult listens? A child listens, he just listens. There's no, but, let me try and apply it, let me judge it, let me see how this fits in with everything that I know. He doesn't know anything yet. He's just listening to something. He's receiving, that's it. That's the proper way to listen. What happens when an adult listens, at least naturally, if we don't curb that? An adult hears something, he says, hold on a second, but I heard something else the other day. Let me see if I want to believe you or not. Let me see what you're saying. We stop listening after a fraction of a second of the person opening their mouths. Why? Because the moment that they open their mouths, now we're judging. Now we're taking stock, we're comparing, we're contrasting, we're doing all sorts of judgment to the thing that you're telling me. We're not just receiving, we're actually also giving in all of our own opinions. The Mishnah invokes this difference to teach every single person a practical lesson, no matter our age. Learning Torah as an older person is comparable to ink inscribed on erased paper, right? When we choose to learn Torah like that, we become cynical. We're worn out. We're mature adults judging the Torah to see. When you learn Torah, you shouldn't learn that way. You should be able to adopt a mindset, and any person of any age can do this. We should choose to adopt a mindset of fresh receiving and not being there so much. How can we do that? How can an adult who has already accumulated knowledge and life experience put that all aside and just receive like a child, learn with the mindset of a child? So Chassidus has what to say about this, okay? And text 7 is going to be a very deep text, and he's making two separate points, and we'll unpack it right after we read it. But first, let's read it. Ron, if you can read for us, please. Text 7, page 69.
When students study with their mentor, they must divest their minds and thoughts from other matters, stripping themselves of all personal thoughts. Failure to detach themselves from personal thoughts will obstruct their ability to absorb the communicated ideas. Additionally, when listening to the teacher's delivery, students must not employ their own intellect to understand the spoken concepts. If they do, then at that moment, they will not be in a state of receptivity, and they will not truly receive the concepts imparted by the teacher. Instead, they must set aside their own minds, only listening to and absorbing the ideas from the teacher. That is, when they truly receive the communicated ideas. In other words, to be in a state of reception means to be in a state of bittul, self-surrender.
This reading, in general, is emphasizing the necessity of quieting the mind when you're engaged in listening. And I would say this is the fundamental point. We're going to break it down now, but that's the fundamental point. When in order to listen effectively to another person, you have to be able to quiet the mind. This is why, incidentally, the words listen are the same letters as the word silent. Because in order to really properly be able to listen, you have to be able to silence yourself. Now, obviously, that means physically. You can't be speaking, otherwise you can't listen to someone else, right? But there's a much deeper insight here. That in order to be able to listen, you have to be able to make your mind silent. In order to be able to listen to what the other person is trying to actually tell you, you have to be able to make your mind silent. Now, this happens in two ways. The first paragraph and the second paragraph. Let's analyze them one at a time. In the first paragraph, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, is teaching us that the more obvious type of distraction, and that is quiet the mind from distraction. If something else is on your mind, for example, your wife is now talking to you about her difficult day, and you've been thinking about the ball game, it's time to put the ball game out of your mind and actually listen to what your wife is saying. That seems to be the more obvious one. It's still important to know that and recognize that you cannot be thinking about two things at once. So if you're thinking about the ball game, you're not actually processing what your wife is telling you. Okay, beautiful. But here's the other point, okay, and the deeper point. It's not just about quieting the mind from distraction. Look at the second paragraph. What does he say? He says in the second paragraph, he says, it's not just about quieting the mind from outside thoughts. It's even from analyzing the current thoughts. Quiet the mind from analysis. Quiet the mind from judging. Quiet the mind even from processing. In other words, when the other person is talking, Number one, take all distraction out of your mind. Other topics cannot be on your mind. And number two, even the topic they're talking about, stop thinking about how to respond to them. Stop thinking about how this changes this or that. Just listen right now. Quiet everything. Silence in the mind. And listen and take in. When they're done, you can pause, and now you'll be able to actually analyze it and then perhaps give a response. Right? This, my friends, is proper listening. Even the subject matter itself has to be quieted from the mind. You know, nobody here, but there are some people at the in-person class, and I think some people who watch the recording that come to my Sunday morning class. On Sunday morning, I have a class which is called Stepping Up Kosher. And right now, many of you are wondering what's the connection between the laws of kosher and the importance of listening. So I'll tell you. There's an old Hasidic thought, excuse me, which goes as follows. That one of the laws, one of the rules about kosherizing can be applied also to listening. What is that? There is a law with regards to kosherizing that goes like this. When you want to kosherize a vessel, let's say you have a spoon that was used for milk and meat and whatever, and now it's not kosher and you need to kosherize it. How do you do so? Anybody know? You take it, you dip it into boiling hot water, or you have to blowtorch it, depending on how the milk and meat flavor went into it. You take it under extreme heat. What happens? The term for this in Hebrew is, it's bolea. It's polit. Everything that it was bolea. It spits out any taste that it might have swallowed in. In other words, this spoon has pores in it. Pores that we can't see, right? Under a microscope, you can see them, right? And when it comes under extreme heat, these pores open up. So let's say you use the spoon in a boiling hot pot of milk. So the pores opened up. Milk went into it. Now you put that same spoon, even though it's clean, you put that same spoon into a boiling hot pot of meat. The pores open up and the meat spits out, and the milk flavor spits out, and now you have milk and meat in here, and that's why you're not allowed to eat it, and that's why the spoon is not kosher, etc., etc. Okay, beautiful. But here's the deep point. Let me ask you a question. When you kosherize the spoon, what are we saying? You dip it into a pot of boiling hot water. In other words, opening up the pores, and now it spits out any flavor that it has in it, and now it's fresh. You can use it for whatever you want. I have a question. How come we don't say that when it spits out the taste from the spoon, it also swallows back in? So whatever non-kosher taste there was inside the spoon spits out and then comes back in. If the pores are open, it's a two-way street, no? So the halacha teaches us, Jewish law teaches us, that it's not a two-way street. Actually, it's a one-way street. Why? Because if the pores are busy spitting out, then they cannot swallow in. Because there's stuff in the way. The stream is going one way. And therefore, if it's spitting out, it can't swallow in. One of the old Hasidic sages used to say, the same thing is true about a human being. If you're busy spitting out, you cannot swallow. If you're busy talking, you cannot listen. Now, this is, on its most fundamental level, this is true about physically. If you're talking, you can't listen. But this is also true of the mind. If you're busy processing, then that's where you are. You're not listening. If you're busy giving out your own ideas, if you're animal souling, if you're letting your animal soul give out its own ideas, even if it's only in your mind, then you cannot receive the ideas from someone else. And that's the fundamental idea. Here we go. That's the fundamental idea behind why you have to quiet the mind. That's the fundamental idea behind listening. That you have to be able to quiet the mind, both from other topics, obviously, distraction, but also from even internal analysis. So let's go back to that story about Sam. Yeah? You guys remember Sam? His friend comes over to him and says, "You're always late." Now, earlier we brought this in order to say that Sam should really be listening to his friend and appreciating the things, the feeling behind the words. He should really be listening properly. But there's another element here, right? Here are some of the things that Sam can say that show that he's not really listening to his friend. He can say to him, "It's not true that I always come late. I don't always come late." Sorry, let me just take this down like that we can actually pay attention. Okay, there we go. It's not true that I always come late. Sometimes I do come late. Sometimes I don't come late. It's not true that I always come late. Sam is so busy in his mind coming up with excuses, he's not really listening to what his friend is telling him, right? He's going to go through, "What about the time you came late?" You're already preparing your response. You're not actually listening to what I'm saying, right? Under the circumstances, if you would know what happened to me, I of course I have a right to come late. You're analyzing, you're judging, you're responding, you're busy in your own mind, you're not actually listening to what he's saying to you, right? And for sure, if he starts to think about the implications of this, why do I hang out with such petty friends that get so upset at me for coming late, right? Now you're totally not listening to your friend. The common denominator between all of these wrong answers that I just told you is that Sam is thinking things that are on topic. He's not thinking about the ball game. He's actually thinking about what his friend told him, and the fact that his friend just said to him, "You're always late," and he's thinking about that topic. But he's thinking about that topic not in a way of receiving, he's thinking about that topic in a way of giving. And I think that that's such an important... We're going to skip the exercise. Actually, they don't even have it in your book. It's just my teacher's manual. But I think it's redundant, this exercise. They have an exercise, but they want to practice this in person. It works much better if we're in an in-person room. So we're going to skip that exercise, but I think you guys get the point. In order to be able to receive, you have to stop giving for a moment. You have to silence and quiet the mind and actually be able to listen. Okay. That is the general attitude. What I'd like to do for the remainder of the lesson, in the remaining 20 minutes, is spend some time on some practical, concrete tips and behaviors to become better listeners. Because just like last week, it doesn't help us just to say, you can tune in with your godly soul and be a little bit more open to receiving, and then you're going to be able to listen to other people. We need some actual concrete tips. And it turns out that Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, gives them to us, okay? Ethics of Our Fathers has this beautiful Mishnah, and it's text 8, and we're going to read it in a moment. But first, let's do this really cool video, okay? You might want to take out your pen, and on a blank page, or maybe here on the margins of the page, write down as we learn the different tips in this video, and then you'll see how they're all in text 8 in this Mishnah in Pirkei Avot and Ethics of Our Fathers. Okay, let's check out this really cool video, and we'll regroup right afterwards.
When sound waves hit our eardrums, we hear, but are we truly listening? Often not. True listening involves a set of behaviors that form the foundation for authentic communication. To see this in action, let's eavesdrop on a conversation between adult siblings, Hannah, Leah, Ben, and Isaac. Their elderly mother is returning home after a hospital stay due to a bad fall. They're discussing her future care. As we listen in, we'll spot some effective listening behaviors, and some blunders too. Here's what we'll do. When a sibling displays a good listening behavior, they'll earn a medal. If they slip up, they'll get a zap to help correct the behavior. Ready?
Mom's coming home Tuesday. We need to plan her care. Dr. Johnson's concerned about her hypokalemia. I wonder if Dad can handle...
Dad's tough. We've all heard his Vietnam stories. I think he'll manage just fine.
Hannah interrupted, undermining effective listening.
Oh, I think I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Isaac, what exactly is hypokalemia? And what did Dr. Johnson recommend?
Leah admitted she didn't understand. That type of honesty is key to good listening.
Dr. Johnson suggests we contact Golden Years Manor, a nursing home. Hypokalemia is low potassium in the blood.
Isaac answered out of sequence, a subtle but important mistake in listening.
If I could, just for a second, I want to update you all on my marriage. We're seeing a therapist, and I'm not sure where it's going.
Ben changed the subject, a listening no-no.
But we can discuss that later.
Thanks for explaining, Isaac. I'm not sure about a nursing home, and I'm also worried about Dad being alone. But you're suggesting Mom would be better off at Golden Years. Can you explain why?
Hannah asked a clarifying question, an excellent listening move.
Dr. Johnson mentioned that hypokalemia can cause fatigue, irregular heartbeat, and muscle weakness, which might make it hard for her to breathe. The staff at Golden Years are trained for this. Oh, I didn't know any of that. Thanks for clarifying.
Ben acknowledged learning something new, an important listening behavior.
I think we should keep Mom at home.
Leah finalized her opinion too quickly after hearing the options. That's quite the opposite of good listening.
Actually, I take that back. I'd like to sleep on it before deciding.
Leah is now open to considering what others said. Good listening.
We wish Mom a speedy recovery. Meanwhile, this conversation reminded us of listening behaviors that the Mishnah lists as crucial for effective communication. The more listening medals we earn, the better our communication will be, and our relationships will be greatly enhanced as a result.
All right. So now it's time to analyze exactly what we've been doing throughout this video. Okay. This video, by the way, you might have recognized a lot of the tips they were doing, the green ones and the red ones, right? The good tips and the bad tips. A lot of them were in the opening exercise. I don't know if you guys all had enough time to do it, but if you didn't, I highly recommend doing it. On page, right, the one that started on page 52 went for a few pages, 52, 53, 54, and then we scored it on page 55, right? A lot of them you'll recognize that some of the statements they came up with here are based on these tips. Where are these tips from? These tips are from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers. It's text 8. We're going to first read the Mishnah, and then I'll unpack the different things that were mentioned in the video, and you'll be able to see them in the Mishnah itself. Ron, if you can read for us, please, on page 71, Habits of Successful Listeners.
7 traits are present in a golem, immature person, and 7 in a chacham, wise person. Wise people, 1, do not speak in front of one who is greater than they in wisdom or number. 2, do not interrupt the words of another. 3, do not hasten to respond. 4, ask to the point and answer as is proper. 5, respond to the first point first and the last point last. 6, declare, I have not heard, when they did not hear. And 7, concede to the truth. The opposites of these traits are to be found in the golem.
Thank you, Ron. The Mishnah provides several best practices related to communication in order to help us be able to communicate effectively and listen properly to someone else. Today, we're going to focus on 5 of the 7 points. Okay, we're not going to talk about the first and the last. We're only going to talk about 2 to 6. The first one, in very short, is basically just not to speak in front of someone who is greater than you in wisdom or someone that is greater than you in number. Usually people translate that as number meaning age, someone who's older than you. And number 7, which is to concede the truth, really is also very much related to listening, but it's beyond the scope of today's conversation. Let's focus on the middle 5. Okay, let's go through them one at a time. Number 1 is, I'll pull them up on the screen as we go through. Number 1 is, do not intrude. Do not interrupt. While that's a widely acknowledged social norm, not to interrupt when somebody's speaking, many people fall short of that social norm all the time. Why? The fundamental problem behind why people interrupt when someone else is talking is because they are listening as a means to an end. They're not listening to align themselves with God's purpose. They're not listening in order to connect to the other person, to get to know the other person, to listen, to provide. No, they're listening as a means of gathering information, a means to an end, to have the opportunity to speak. So if that opportunity presents itself halfway through, the person made half their point, or 3/4 of their point, or even 99% of their point, but they haven't finished. So if you're listening in order to let the other person speak, for whatever reason it is that you're trying, so then, okay, great. You wait until the whole thing is over. You have 1% left. Let the other person finish. Once they're fully finished, then either you do or you don't have something to say. But at least the listening was done with a purpose. But if the whole reason you're listening is just in order to speak, so then, yeah, if halfway through the temptation becomes too strong, or 99% of the way through the temptation becomes too strong, then we interrupt. Now, there are instances in which the other person might be saying something that we already know, or something about which they're maybe making a major mistake, right? And here we are more prone to interject and inform the speaker that we already know what they're about to say, and you're going to save them time, right? Or what you're going to say is wrong. But even in those instances, we need to avoid the behavior. Why? Because if you really want to learn something new about the person, and remember that new could either be the words that they're saying or the feeling behind what they're saying, or the personality behind what they're saying, right? If you want to learn something new, let them finish talking, and then you'll be able to listen to it. By the way, Hashem provides us with a blueprint for this type of listening. In last week's parsha, right, there's an argument between God and Abraham. Abraham is trying to save the city of Sodom. Sodom was an evil city, and Hashem had decided to destroy it. And Abraham starts to go through. Ula yesh chamishim. Maybe there are 50 people that are righteous. Maybe there are 40 people that are righteous. Now, when he starts his whole statement, Hashem knows there's no 50 people that are righteous. According to Hashem, I just interrupted him. I know what you're thinking. There's 50 righteous people. There's no 50 righteous people. And you know what? While I'm at it, there's no 40, there's no 30, there aren't even 10 righteous people. But Hashem appreciates that this isn't only about listening to what Avraham is saying. Hashem is not listening in order to gather information. He is listening to allow Avraham to talk, to allow Avraham to express his chesed, to express his kindness, to express who he is, and to have a connection between God and Avraham. In fact, the whole conversation begins when Hashem says, "Hamechasa ani me Avram." Hashem says, "Avram is so beloved to me. Am I going to hide from him what I'm planning to do to Sodom and Gomorrah?" And therefore, he goes on to tell Avram about it. So the whole purpose of this conversation is for connection. The whole purpose of this conversation is way beyond the information that's being gleaned. So Hashem doesn't interrupt Avram and tell him, "No, there are no 50 righteous people." He waits till he finishes, and then Hashem says to him, "Okay, I won't destroy the city if there are 50 righteous people." He waits until Avram finishes before answering. And that is tip number 1, which is don't intrude when the other person is talking. Number 2, do not respond impulsively. In the video, we saw that there was one of the, I think it was the girl old man on the left, that responds, right? "I don't think we should send mom to dad to a home." Now, it could be that there's very good reason behind what she's saying. But the very fact that she interrupted halfway through the conversation and is saying, "This is what I think we should do," means she's responding impulsively. She's not actually listening to what everybody else is saying and not actually processing this and then coming to the conclusion. And it could be she'll come to the conclusion that she doesn't think that we should send dad to a home, right? One of the best tests, one of the best barometers to know whether you're doing this or not is simply to leave empty time. Think about it. How often do you usually leave, how long usually elapses between when a person makes their comment and when you respond to them? For most conversations, it's barely a second. A person talks, the next second the person responds. But truly listening should really mean that you should pause and reflect. And then, if you were listening during the comment, then now you need time to actually think about what they were saying. And only afterwards will you respond. Shouldn't it at least take a few seconds, right? This need is more pronounced when we understand the underlying principle that we said. The underlying principle behind listening, we said, is silence, right? While the person is talking, you're supposed to not be judging, not be formulating a response, not even be formulating an opinion. You're supposed to just be listening. You're not supposed to be thinking about other distractions, and you're not even supposed to be analyzing the topic at hand. So then for sure you need a few seconds afterwards in order to be able to respond, right? So that's why impulsive responding impulsively is a big no-no when it comes to actually, it's a big sign that you're not really listening properly. Number 3, ask to the point and answer as is proper. Okay, this is very, very powerful. There's 2 vital points here. Number 1 is stay on topic. We saw the guy who decides that he wants to talk about his marriage and the fact that they're seeing a therapist in the middle of a conversation about the father. If you're talking in the middle of a conversation and you find either your mind or you're actually speaking completely off topic, there's clearly a problem with the listening going on. But number 2 is probably a much deeper point, which is even if you're on topic, ask questions, follow-up questions to be able to gain clarity about what the other person is saying. That is the biggest proof that you're listening. If a person is telling you about something that they're going through and you ask specific questions in order to be able to understand, you're following up to be able to understand exactly where they're coming from, that's proper listening. That's active listening, by the way. Okay? And that is the third point that we're analyzing today, but the 4th point in the Mishnah, ask and answer to the point. And number 4 of the points that we're analyzing today is respond in order. Respond to the first point first and to the last point last. This is also a very good listening behavior. Why? If the other person mentioned 3 points, they mentioned them in a specific order, there's a good likelihood that there's a specific reason. They're either building a case or saying them in a specific order because the first one means more to them, whatever it is. If you respond, but you're responding in the order you think you should respond, not in the order the way they asked the question, right? A person asks you 3 questions in a specific order, and you answer them in a very different order, or a person makes 3 points, and you repeat those 3 points, but you repeat them in a very different order, then obviously you're not paying attention to the way that they're saying it. Respecting their preference means you're not just listening to the words they're saying, but you're listening to the nuance and to the framing and the way that they're saying it. And finally, number 5 is if a person, a chacham, a truly wise person, good listening means when a person hears something that they never heard before, they say, "I had never heard that before. I did not know that." You may have noticed that in the video, right? There were two people who acknowledged that there was new information brought to the table here that they didn't know. That's a very, very big point. And it goes again in the face of the animal soul. The animal soul will never admit that he doesn't know anything. That's the exact opposite of selfishness. I should admit that I'm lacking something. No, it's all about me and I'm perfect and I'm everything, right? But a person who's properly listening has the vulnerability to be able to say, I didn't understand what you said. Can you please clarify that for me? I don't know what this means. Can you please clarify that for me? Or if it's already been clarified, he says, thank you for clarifying that for me. You just gave me a piece of information that I did not know, and I want to thank you for that. That acknowledgement is a very, very big deal. The vulnerability to be able to say, I did not know that, or if it was already clarified for you, or if it's being clarified, to be able to say, I do not know what you're saying to me. Can you please repeat that? Can you please say it in other words? Asking for more information in order to be able to understand, that takes a lot of vulnerability. And vulnerability, as we spoke about earlier, is a crucial point here. Because you're supposed to be coming in with the attitude, I don't know whatever you're providing. Even if I know the information you're providing, I don't know you, and I don't know what's bothering you, and I don't know your emotions. I'm coming with a vulnerability that here in this situation, I am lacking. And whatever you tell me is going to fill that lack. Letting the other person know that you didn't understand something is inviting them to elaborate and to clarify, which obviously is amazing listening. There are other tips, but I think this is a very, very good place to start with these 5 tips. You can see them in figure 2.6 on page 72. 7 of them are listed, but we went through the middle 5, and I think that should be a very good place to start to work on those over the course of the next few weeks of our lives to actually be listening properly to other people. Okay, I'd like to conclude first with an exercise. On page 73, we're going to conclude with an exercise, which is, which items featured in figure 2.6 are you already good at? The ones that we just listed, right? Put them down, and regarding which of them can you use improvement, and the ones that leave room for improvement, which you consider the most crucial for listening, and how are you going to work on them? The reason for this exercise is because I don't believe any of us are perfect at everything that was listed in figure 2.6. Never mind the first figure, where we gave ourselves a score at the beginning of the lesson. But even in figure 2.6 on page 72, most of us have somewhere here that we can use improvement, and identifying that and resolving to be able to try and make that better is a good way to start taking it up a notch when it comes to our listening. In closing, much of what we learned today can be summarized by this following quote, which is text 9. The physical anatomy of a human being is actually designed to teach us something very important about listening. Phil, can you read it for us, please? It's text 9 from Rabbi Yosef Nechemias.
A person once observed that a colleague tended to speak far more than he listened, so he told the fellow, notice the difference between your ears and your mouth. God created you with 2 ears, but just a single mouth, implying that we should listen twice as much as we speak.
A human being is created with 2 ears and 1 mouth, teaching us that we're supposed to speak at least, we're supposed to listen at least twice as much as speak. Elsewhere in Pirkei Avot it says, Emor me'at v'aseh harbe. Speak little and do a lot. If I may improvise on that, speak a little and listen a lot. If we all chose to at least make sure the percentage of our lives that we're speaking and that we're listening is the percentage of our lives that we're listening is double the percentage of our lives that we're speaking, and that same percentage in every single conversation we have with other people, then it will turn us into much better listeners, and we will need to speak a lot less because we'll actually appreciate the other person, and we won't need to speak so much. Please turn your attention to the video screens for a summary of today's lesson, and with this we will conclude Lesson 2.
Lesson 2. The Art of Listening. 1. Hearing is the perception of sound, whereas listening requires opening the mind and heart to absorb an articulated message. Hearing is effortless. Listening is a challenging art to master. 2. Listening is crucial for relationships. We need to listen to provide properly to those around us, to know them meaningfully, and to connect with them profoundly. 3. Providing for others, knowing others, and connecting with others are not inherent to the makeup of the animal soul. Listening becomes more natural when we are in tune with our best selves, giving the godly soul, a natural listener, a stronger voice in our lives. 4. Jewish mysticism emphasizes the importance of living with a mission mindset, discovering how every experience, including the words we hear, relates to our greater purpose. This awareness motivates us to listen, to align with what God expects of us in the moment. 5. To listen means to adopt a child's mindset, quieting the mind, not only from thoughts unrelated to the subject, but also from reflection and judgment about the articulated message. After the speaker concludes, the second step of good listening is carefully analyzing the message to read between the lines. 6. The Mishnah advocates several communication habits that create an environment conducive to good listening.
Thank you all for joining us for lesson 2. This has been the art of listening, and we look forward to seeing you all next week for lesson 3, the art of disagreement. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.